besides Camponenes Cup between Atlanta versus Club America, that's going to be happening tomorrow, and the Canadian Championship second leg semifinal, that's also going to be happening in the middle of the week. We have 5 midweek games for MLS Matchweek number 24, and most of these midweek games is going to be featuring a Western Conference team, and that there is a lot of playoff position and playoff implication that is up for grabs in terms of these midweek games. In fact, the teams between 2nd through 8th in the standing in the Western Conference is all going to be playing in this midweek action, except for the San Jose Earthquakes, and that I have a feeling by the end of this week and by the end of this Portland versus Chicago matchup that the Western Conference is going to look completely different than it looked right now as it stands as we're heading into the midweek action. But the first game that I'm going to be talking about in the middle of the week is Orlando City versus Sporting KC. So Orlando City is 8-6-11, while Sporting KC is 7-7-10. Orlando City is currently in 9th place and 3 points below the red line, while Sporting KC is currently 10th place and 8 points below the red line. Orlando City drew 1-1 to TFC away in the last match, while SKC lost 2-1 to RSL at home in the last match. This game has a lot of playoff implication in terms of each conferences for Orlando City, since they're only 3 points back off the red line, and that technically if every team has played a game in the Eastern Conference, Orlando City would actually be in 8th place right now, and they would be 3 points behind TFC. And, if they can, of course, win this game, they will, of course, tie with TFC in terms of the last position in the Eastern Conference. Well, for SKC, as I said back in the review, this is a important stretch for them where they're going to be fighting against teams that is going to be, they're going to be playing against team that is going to be fighting for those last couple of positions in the Western Conference, and they already got off to a bad start when they lost 2-1 to RSL at home. They got to make sure that it doesn't get worse when they play against Orlando City, and knowing the fact that the other as I mentioned, with a lot of Western Conference team is going to be playing this week, they could easily find themselves either with a win, could be 5 points behind in terms of the last playoff position in the Western Conference, or they would find themselves 11 points below the red line, and that if that is the case, then I kind of think that SKC might be done this season, and that's just way too much of a gap to overcome. So a lot of big playoff implication match that or a lot of big playoff implication is in this match, and that both of these teams definitely wants to get a win to improve their chances of going above the red line. But moving on into the next match is Minnesota. So the Loons is going to be playing against Colorado. The Loons is 11-5-8, while the Rapids are 7-5-12. Minnesota is currently in a two-way tie for third, and that they're currently tied with San Jose in terms of that third spot, while they are also 2 points above the red line. Colorado is currently 11th in the standings and 10 points below the red line. And, obviously Colorado, as much as they have started to try to start another unbeaten run to get them back into the playoff race, I just don't know if it's enough for them to overcome a 10-point deficit with around 9 games left this season. Although one thing that the Rapids have been doing very good this season is that they have been a big spoiler to those big teams. Like, it seemed like most big teams, when they face Colorado, they tends to think that it's an easy victory against the Rapids, and then they find out that it's not, and that they are actually a spoiler kind of team. Which is why I say for Minnesota, they got to be very careful about this match, because while they're playing at home at Allianz Field, which they have been so good this season at home, they're playing against a Rapids team that started to find that hot streak that they had back in June and July. And again, like I said, this is a team that love to play the spoiler role and love to spoil chances for some of these Western Conference teams in terms of either making the playoffs or get a better playoff position. Now, in the last game for both of these teams, Minnesota lost 5-3 to Dallas away, but that was a match where they didn't really start their strongest 11, and I have a feeling that maybe Adrian Heath would think about starting his strongest starting 11 in this game, but Minnesota does have another game coming up on Saturday, and I believe next week they will be playing in the U.S. Open Cup final game against Atlanta. So Minnesota is kind of started to find themselves in a very congested kind of schedule, and it's a huge for Adrian Heath. This is definitely a huge concern, and that he's gonna have to do the best to not only trying to balance in terms of this squad to trying to get points at home, but hopefully this congested schedule will not cause Minnesota to drop points against easy opponent. Colorado, of course, won 2-1 against the Quakes at home. On the road, they haven't been as good as they've been at home, but again, they love to play the spoiler road, and I won't be surprised if Colorado does get a point or even all 3 points against Minnesota, just because they love to play against the big teams. But moving on into the next match is RSL. So RSL is playing against the Sounders, and I'm also gonna actually talk about the very next game too, between the Galaxy versus FC Dallas, because both of these games are kind of very similar to each other. Both of these games feature teams that is in that playoff position, and that depending on if one of these 4 teams is gonna win, they can of course propel themselves all the way up into second place in the standings. But if they lose that game, or if one of these teams drew in this game, then they could find themselves fall below the red line, or even find themselves drop all the way down near around the red line after this midweek. But for the first game that I'll talk about, between RSL versus Seattle, RSL is 11-4-9, while the Sounders is 11-6-7. RSL is currently 6 and 1 point above the red line and 2 points from second place. So if they can win this game, they can technically get all the way up to second place. While Seattle currently occupies that second spot, but they're only 3 points above the red line, and they have definitely been struggling lately. They drew 3-3 against New England at home, while RSL, of course, won 2-1 against SKC. And this is really a game between a team that is red hot right now, not only at home, but also started to catch that red hot form when they're on the road, while they're playing against a Sounders team that has really been going into a bit of a slump because of the injuries that they have suffered in terms of the defense and also on the attack. Now, I'm not quite sure if some of those players that they're going to be missing, like Brad Smith and Calvin Leerdam in that defense area, would come back into this game. They better hope that they, of course, would get those players back in this game, because RSL is a team that is very good at home, and is a team that I think they're definitely going to be the favorites coming into this game against the Sounders. And that, like I said, if the Sounders does lose this game, depending on what other team does below them, they could easily find themselves, from being in second position, dropping all the way down near above the red line. Now, talk about the Galaxy versus FC Dallas. The Galaxy, they're currently 12-1-11, while Dallas is currently 10-6-9, and the Galaxy is currently 5th in the standing, just 1 point above the red line, while Dallas is currently 7th in the standing, and they're 2 points ahead of Portland, who is below the red line. But keep in mind, Dallas does have a game in hand over Portland, so theoretically, if every team has played a game in the Western Conference, FC Dallas would find themselves below the red line, because Portland does have that game in hand. The Galaxy did lose 2-1 to DC United away, while Dallas, of course, won 5-3 to Minnesota at home. But this is a road game for Dallas, which, this season on the road has not been a huge friend to FC Dallas, as they have really struggled this season on the road. But then again, they're playing against a Galaxy team that is struggling at home. So in some way, I can see this match as a match of something has to give, with the way that, it's a team that's struggling on the road against a team that is struggling at home. It's a team that is kind of stuttering in the last couple of matches against a team that, has been kind of up and down a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think both of these teams want to get 3 points, because, like I said before with this RSL versus Seattle game, both of these matchup can have a lot to do with the teams that is currently in that very tight, congested the playoff race in the Western Conference, and that if you can get a win in those games and that the other team loses, you can propel yourself all the way up into second in the Western Conference. So yeah, that of course will be interesting to see who exactly will do that. But finally, moving on into the final match that I am going to be previewing is Portland. So remember how I said in the review that Portland was above the red line? Well, I actually was wrong. They're actually still below the red line. But technically, if, like I said before, with every team that have played a single game in the West, well, if every team had played the same amount of game in the Western Conference, then Portland technically is above the red line as they have a game over FC Dallas, and that they're playing against a Chicago Fire team that all of a sudden are started to come back from the dead, and that a couple of weeks ago it looked like for sure that they were out of the playoff race, but a couple of victories and draws has got their record to 7, 9, and 10, and all of a sudden they're only 3 points behind Montreal for that last playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. Now, their chances of potentially maybe get above the red line and potentially get a little bit closer in terms of that red line in the Eastern Conference is going to be a very tough task, because they're playing against a Timbers team that is playing their second of what would be 10 games at home, and they of course are currently in 8th place, 2 points below the red line, while Chicago, as I mentioned before, currently 10th and 3 points below the red line. And they got off to this 10-game homestand with a great start and a 3-1 victory against the Whitecaps, while Chicago, like I said, they've been kind of on a bit of a row and won 3-2 against Montreal at home. But they're facing a Timbers team that they definitely want to use these home game as a way to propel themselves above the red line and also getting into the top part of the Western Conference. So yeah, this game is definitely very interesting, in that, like many of the games that I talked about, it has a lot of playoff implication, and pretty much every game from now to the end of the season has a lot of playoff implication, and I cannot wait to see how the playoff race is going to settle, because I think when you look at both conferences right now, the Eastern Conference is very tight right now between first and all the way down to 10th place. There's only, I believe, a 7-point gap. While in the Western Conference, if you not include LAFC that is just running away with the conference, between 2nd and 10th is only an 8-point gap, and that there is definitely still a lot to fight for in terms of those spots. So yeah, this is definitely a very interesting time in MLS, and that we are really heading down to the wire in terms of the playoff race that is going on, and that the playoffs is about to start heading into October. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of these games, and make sure you guys leave a prediction below about what about these 5 games that's going to be happening in MLS Matchweek number 24 midweek action. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.